So just want to say, first of all, if you're not here every week or haven't been in the past, you can find out how to see future episodes and things like that on that little red card in front of you there. Shows you how to get the podcasts and how to watch on YouTube. And if you want to be on our mailing list, little blue card, you can fill that in and just drop it in the plate or give it to someone, and we'll make sure that you find out what's going on in the chapel over the next period of time. So, we're going to start a new series today. We sort of do series, 4 or 5 weeks, something like that, on a particular topic. And the topic we're going to talk about over the next period of time is the idea of realization. Realization meaning to bring into existence, to make or cause to become real. Also exhibit the actual existence of, from the French réaliser, which means to make real. And this is actually the season of realization. In the church, it's called Epiphany. And I didn't want to call this Epiphany because it's a bit of a weird word, and we don't use it that often. But Epiphany, today really is Epiphany Sunday. An epiphany is the celebration of the revelation of Christ to the Gentiles. That's what it means in church language. And it's specifically the 3 wise men. That's really what Epiphany is about. And the actual Epiphany is actually something that most of us want. It's a sudden intuitive perception or insight into reality initiated by some simple, homely, or commonplace occurrence or experience. Now, the actual classic example of an epiphany is the apple falling on Newton's head and his realization about the nature of gravity. So that's what epiphany is, or it could be something else. Some little thing that happens. You go, wow, yes, of course. So that's epiphany, and it comes from the Greek meaning to reveal. The Greek word is epiphanein, which means to reveal. So it's about revealing something. That's what epiphany is about. And Jesus is revealed to the Gentiles. That's what the church celebrates. And it happens in 2 ways. It's the 3 wise men coming to Jesus is the first way. And they have the epiphany as they realize their vision of following the star and then finding the chosen one. And in the Orthodox Church calendar, yesterday is Christmas, is January the 6th. The 3 wise men give their presents. They celebrate Christmas at that particular moment, and that's obviously where present giving comes from. And it's also the celebration of Jesus' consecration in the temple, where Jesus was brought to the temple, and Anna and Simeon, who have the realization of years of waiting. Both had waited faithfully for a revelation to take place. And they knew in their hearts that it would come. And, when they saw Jesus, they had the epiphany, this is the Messiah. And those words of Simeon's actually ended up as what we, in the Anglican Church, I think in the Catholic Church, call the Nunc Dimittis. Do you know what the Nunc Dimittis is? Anyone, put your hand up if you know what the Nunc Dimittis is. Thank you, Bill. It's a very famous, they have these canticles in the church, and the Nunc Dimittis is one. It's, Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all people, to be a light to lighten the Gentiles, and to be the glory of thy people Israel. Have you had that before? Yeah, that's a canticle that is used a lot in the church, and it's directly from this. And it's interesting, this is by the by, but these canticles in the church, the Nunc Dimittis, it's called the Nunc Dimittis because there's the 2 first words in Latin, which is, now you dismiss, Nunc Dimittis, Lord, now lettest now thy servant. So we call it by the Latin name. You probably want to go like she is right now, giving I'm now going into Latin and canticles. But you need to have a bit of churchiness there. But Bridget knows well. And the other ones, who's heard of the Te Deum? See, I'm really right on that. You have, Bill. I know you have as well. The Te Deum comes from "We praise thee, O Lord." That's another canticle. And anyway, and the Magnificat. You must have heard the Magnificat. And that comes from Mary's prayer, "My soul magnifies the Lord." So that's how those canticles are named from the Latin words. But as I said, I digress. So Simeon, Anna, and the kings all had that moment of realization. Something was made real and that they had sensed was going to happen. They sensed it was going to happen. In the case of the kings, they'd worked out from their astrological wisdom that at the end of the particular journey, following that particular star, there ought to be some type of king. That's what they worked out. And in the case of Simeon and Anna, they felt a promise. So it's a different sort of realization. They felt a promise within themselves that they would see the Messiah, the redemption of Israel. And in both cases, the realization came about that what they sensed was made real. And I think that process of realization is worth looking at because we're looking at the realization of our dreams. My daughter always talks about manifesting things. Are you going to manifest that, Dad? And funnily enough, there's a whole sort of modern sort of folk spiritual stuff around what people call manifestation. So we might go into that a bit. But realization is what we're talking about. And I think, you've got Anna and Simeon who had that sense within themselves. Everybody probably thought they were bonkers, hanging around the temple, that old man and old woman hanging around the temple, saying they're going to meet the Messiah. They have that realization. But I think whether we admit it to ourselves or not, we have within us whispered promises. Our heart whispers promises to us. Promises about our lives that we think we might have heard, but we're also not too sure. And when we think about these whispered promises, we treat them very carefully because on the one hand, we don't want to examine them too carefully and shatter them before they sort of come into existence. And on the other hand, we don't want to invest too much in them in case they're merely siren voices taking us off course in our lives and having us crash on the rocks of disappointment. There's a phrase that is used of Mary, Jesus' mother, and she has, you can hear it in Luke, the whispers that she has, hearing the words of the angels and the kings and Anna and Simeon. And later when Jesus was a boy and amazed the teachers in the temple, when Jesus had a lost weekend. I don't think there was much drinking involved, but he ended up in the church, and they found him in the church. He had a lost weekend. And it was said of those things that Mary treasured up these things and pondered on them in her heart. And I think with our whispered promises, we do ponder on them in our hearts. And we treasure things up. Either that or we ignore them and tell ourselves not to believe such silly notions. Or we hear them and think, this is never going to happen in my lifetime. But still, I think those whispers and promises are there. Those whispers that we aspire to. That maybe our lives might mean something. That we might get some special glimpse of eternity. That some form of enlightenment might come to us. That our lives might add up to some special contribution. That maybe we are part of something that is important. That love might arise in our hearts. Those little whispers. Or joy might arise. Or peace might arise. Or maybe that we might see the world become a better place. I have those whispers. And I think all of us do. They're whispers from the divine within our hearts. I wonder what your whispers might be. Whether or not you're aware of them. Little thoughts of things that might happen. Do you listen out for them? Do you give them any particular credence, or do you have any hope of their realization? These few weeks is about those little whispers and about having them become real. Not in an insistent manner that says that this is my right and I will make them become real. But in a more humble manner that says, if these things are truly meant to be, then I will give myself to allowing them to happen. If these things are truly meant to be, I will give myself to allowing them to happen. Like Simeon and Anna, like Mary to the angel at the Annunciation, when she was told all this stuff, she said, let it be to me as you have said. She said, look, if it's God's will, let it be to me as you have said. But I think, that humility doesn't mean to say that we don't have to do the work to have these realizations come about, like the three wise men. I always love that poem, T.S. Eliot's poem, Journey of the Magi. And it really, Journey of the Magi describes how they brought about the difficulty they had in realizing what they finally realized at the end. I'm just going to read it because I think it's just a great poem. This is T.S. Eliot's Journey of the Magi, about the kings. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of year for a journey. And such a journey, the ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter, and the camels gored, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on the slopes, the terraces, the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting liquor and women, and the fire nights going out and the lack of shelter, and the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end, we preferred to travel at night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices ringing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. Then at dawn, we came upon a temperate valley, wet below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a watermill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on the low sky, and a white old horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at the open door dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskin. But there was no information, and so we continued, and arrived at evening, not a moment too soon. Finding the place, it was, you may say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember. I would do it again. But set down this. Were we led all the way for birth or death? There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but I had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our palaces, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation with an alien people clutching to their gods. I should be glad of another death. And that is the story of a realization. That is the epiphany coming about. That is the following through of a realization that everything it involves, the work that it involves. And I think we do have those 2 aspects of ourselves. We have that aspect where the heart whispers to us, and we just have to allow it to happen. We just have to let it come out and not be too looking at it too carefully or bashing it. But then there's that aspect where we do have to do the work, whether it's sitting on the cushion or doing whatever we need to do in order to bring that realization about. Interesting, when I was researching this, I thought, well, I'll go to the prophet, Khalil Gibran, because he always had good stuff on, all this sort of business. And I thought, but when I looked at it, I came across a translation of Gilbrand that had an introduction, and I'd never read the introduction before. And it was fascinating because the introduction is the story of how his realization, how he realized that he had to give the wisdom. And I'm just going to end by reading this to you because I think it's quite interesting. It shows how he describes the prophet, which is the book. If you haven't read it, I do recommend it. How he describes the prophet is persuaded to actually give his wisdom, give his realization. So this is the introduction to the prophet. Al-Mustafa, the chosen and the beloved, who was drawn unto his own day, had waited 12 years in the city of Orphalese for his ship that was to return and bear him back to the isle of his birth. This is the prophet. He'd waited 12 years for the ship to come. And in the 12th year, on the 7th day of Elul, the month of reaping, he climbed the hill without the city walls and looked seaward, and he beheld the ship coming within the mist. Then the gates of his heart were flung open, and his joy flew far over the sea, and he closed his eye and prayed in the silences of his soul. But as he descended the hill, a sadness came upon him, and he thought in his heart, how shall I go in peace and without sorrow? Nay, not without a wound in the spirit shall I leave the city. Long were the days of pain I have spent within these walls, and long were the nights of aloneness. And who can depart from his pain and his aloneness without regret? Too many fragments of the Spirit I have scattered in these streets, and too many are the children of my longing that walk naked among these hills. I cannot withdraw from them without a burden and an ache. It is not a garment I cast off this day, but a skin that I tear with my own hands. Nor is it a thought I leave behind, but a heart made sweet with hunger and thirst. So he's describing his pain and leaving his pain behind. Yet I cannot tarry longer. The sea that calls all things unto her calls me. I must embark. For to stay, though the hours burn in the night, is to freeze and crystallize and be bound in a mold. Fain would I take with me all that's here, but how shall I? A voice cannot carry the tongue and lips that gave it wings. Alone it must seek the ether, and alone and without his nest shall the eagle fly across the sun. Now when he reached the foot of the hill, he turned again towards the sea and saw the ship approaching the harbor, and upon her brow the mariners, the men of his own land. And his soul cried to them, and he said, sons of my ancient mother, you riders of the tides, how often have I sailed with you in my dreams, and now you come in my awakening, which is my deeper dream. Ready am I to go, and my eagerness with sails full set await the wind. Only another breath will I breathe in this still air, only another loving look backwards. And then I shall stand among you, a seafarer among seafarers, and you vast seas, sleeping mother, who alone are at peace and freedom in the river's stream. Only another winding will take this stream one more step, and then shall I come to you, a boundless drop in a boundless open. And as he walked, he saw from afar men and women leaving their fields and their vineyards and hastening towards the city gates. And he heard their voices calling his name and shouting from the field to one another of the coming of a ship. And he said to himself, shall the day of parting be a day of gathering? And shall it be said that my eve was in truth my dawn? And what shall I give unto him who has left his plough mid-furrow, or to him who has stopped the wheel of his winepress? Shall my heart become a tree heavy laden with fruit, and I may gather and give unto them? And shall my desires flow like a fountain, and may I fill their cups? Am I a harp that the hand of the Almighty may touch me, or the flute that his breath may pass through me. He's sort of building up to having this realization. A seeker of silences am I, and what treasure have I found in silences that I may dispense with confidence? If this is my day of harvest, in what fields have I sown the seed, and in what unremembered seasons? If this is indeed be the hour in which I lift up my lantern, it is not my flame that shall burn therein. Empty and dark I shall raise my lantern, and the guardian of the night shall fill it with oil, and he shall light it also. These things he said in words, but much in his heart remained unsaid, for he himself could not speak his deeper secret. Suffer not, yet our eyes to hunger your face. The priests and the priestess said to him, suffer not, yet our eyes hunger for your face. Let not the waves of the sea separate us now, and the years you've spent in our midst become a memory. You have walked among us as a spirit, and your shadow has been a light on our face. So they are calling to him to have his moment. His life is asking the moment to come. Much have we loved you, but speechless was your love, and with veils has been veiled. And now it cries aloud to you, and would you stand and reveal yourself before us? And ever has it been that love knows not its own depth until the hour of separation. And others came also and entreated him, but he answered them not. He only bent his head. And those who stood near saw tears falling upon his breast. And he and the people proceeded towards the great square before the temple. And there came out of the sanctuary a woman whose name was Almitra, and she was a seeress. And he looked upon her with exceeding tenderness, for it was she who had first sought and believed in him when he'd been but a day in their city. And she hailed him, saying, Prophet of God, in quest of the uttermost, long have you searched the distances of your ship, and now your ship has come, and you must needs go. Deep is the longing for the land of your memories and the dwelling place of your secret desires. And our love would not bind you and hold you. Yet this we ask ere you leave us, that you speak to us and give us your truth. I'm in the last bit now. And we shall give it to our children, and they unto their children's children, and it will not perish. In you alone you have watched with our days, and in your wakefulness you have listened to the weeping and laughter of our sleep. Now therefore, disclose to us ourselves, and let us all know what has been shared with you between birth and death. And he answered, People of Elphalsi, of what can I speak, save that which is even now moving within your souls? Then Almetria said, Speak to us of love. And that's how the prophet starts. And then those of you that know it, he then does a bit on love, and then he says, Speak to us on death. And he does a bit on death. And he says, Speak to us on marriage, speak to us on children. And he reveals his epiphany. It comes from the moments of his life that are developed and built, and these whispers that are in our hearts. There's a moment when the whisper is brought into the daylight, and we have to watch for that moment. We have to listen for our lives, listen when we're asked to reveal those moments. And next week, we're just going to look at how that comes about. Thank you. So we always want to give people an opportunity to come back at us, anything that's said. I always like to say that we give out information with a willingness to be wrong. And if you've got any thoughts that you'd like to give us or to contribute to the idea. One thing I was thinking about is, these whispers in our hearts, it's where the idea of vocation comes from. Vocation means, the actual word vocare means calling. And it's almost as if a vocation, when you talk about a vocation, it's that whisper in your heart. And it's very interesting, that idea when people think they miss their vocation. It's almost they miss the calling that's been there in their hearts. And it's so easy for the mind to ride over the heart and to think, well, this is what I want. I want yachts, I want girls, I want money, I want this. So this is what I'm going to do. Whereas perhaps the calling is something different. And the calling represents, as whispers, represents, I think, our relationship with the universe, with the world, and the connection with the divine. And I think that's quite an interesting idea. But it may not. So when we offer out opportunity for someone to say something, sometimes we just have silence, and that's completely okay as well. So there's not some embarrassment if nobody wants to say anything, because that's totally all right. But would anyone like to make a contribution, to say anything at all? Yes, thank you, Andy.
What do you think the difference between that whisper is and your intuition, and following your intuition? Because to me, my intuition is always sort of reaching out, and I don't listen to it. I'm trying to listen to it more, but is that like a whisper?
Yeah. I don't want to come straight back at that, because the answer is I don't know the answer to your question. So I'm going to fumble myself towards what you're saying, because I think there's quite a lot going on within us, isn't there? There's the general feelings of, I need to have a pee, I need to go and get something to eat, or there's the general demands of life feelings. And then there's just the emotional feelings, isn't there? There's the sort of, being moved by our circumstances, that our body responds and our minds responds in sort of different ways. And then there's the intuition. And intuition, I think, is seeing. There is an aspect of seeing into something with intuition, I think. Anyone know where the word, I haven't got my Google in front of me, so I can't work it. Anyone know where the word intuition comes from? Does anyone want to quickly Google it on your phone if you've got it? I'd be interested to know where the word intuition comes from. I'll bring it back next week, because I think it's an interesting thing. But I think the difference between these whispers and intuition is that what we're talking about with these whispers is a deep relationship with the oneness of all things. It is the idea that we're connected, fundamentally connected by the same consciousness. And to me, these whispers that I'm talking about is when you listen to that connection in your heart. And it's not something, I think, that just comes from our bodies giving us an idea of how to survive. But I think it's more a deep connection as to how we individually can respond to what life is calling us to do. Because I think life calls each of us to do different things. I think each of us has completely different, obviously we are different, we've been brought up, but I think each of us, life calls on us to do something totally different. We're not called on to do the same thing. And if we can hear what life is calling on us to do, if we can respond to those whispers, then we're sort of, in a sense, linking into the divine. It's a sort of inner prayer, in a dialogue-like prayer, I think. Did anyone look up? Did you look up intuition? Well, let's have it. You can read it. Do you want to just hit the microphone? The etymology. I can read it out if you don't want to. Go on, I know you too well. Okay, so the intuition is, let me see, the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning, a thing one knows or considers. I wonder what the etymology is. Anyone got the etymology? Man looks up on a... Here we are. No wise. Oh, yeah. Insight, direct or immediate cognition, spiritual perception. So I'll look it up a bit further for next week. But I think there's a connection in there, isn't there? The immediate understanding of it. Yes, Bruce. Thank you for that. That was really useful. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
I thought Andy's, contribution is great. To sort of look at it from a different way between the two words. intuition may be sort of, there's external stimulus.
Yeah.
I see a few dots.
Yeah.
I connect them more. I see the forest, the living edge
Yeah.
of the forest, whatever. And people say, well, how did you do that? Well, I don't
Yeah.
know. I just, made my mind was a predictive machine and what I saw type of thing. And sometimes we can confuse that with that's who I am and that's what my calling is.
Yeah.
As opposed to, the whispering, the calling is more like, you see a bunch of little kids and you put a bunch of toys out there. One kid just gets obsessed with something. Their kids could care less. It's like,
Yeah.
what's that all about? That's just the way they're wired, And
Yeah.
so to sort of try to figure out what your vocation is, you kind of have to go back in your history and just sort of look at sort of recurring little moments that,
Yeah.
I got excited about this. I go, well, what is that saying to me, and
Yeah.
how I'm wired. Obviously they go back and forth, I think, from the outside in and the inside out, but I think it's for many people, it's a lifelong process. And when people, get up at graduation, they'll follow your bliss. I mean, most people never figure it out, or have a midlife crisis, then figure it out or something, but certainly not at, 18 or 22.
Yeah, following your bliss could be just more drugs, please. So, yeah, I'm going to come toward next. So, we're going to read something out, darling?
Yes, well,
You go on.
he just handed me this, a bit more about intuition. 1640s from Middle French, intuitive, or directly from medieval Latin, intuitivus, look at, consider. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty much it, anyway.
I just say, I think that's interesting what you're saying, because and it is interesting that this is the sort of topic for the beginning of the year, isn't it? This is it's not the same as New Year's resolution. This is like beginning of the year thinking, look, what really am I being called to do? What are those whispers in my heart? Yeah, Ward, sorry.
I call that my gut feeling.
Yeah.
Into it, you know it, you just know it. It's like Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, that not from your head, but just from something, you know that piece of artwork isn't real, that it's a forgery. So it's just that I call the gut feeling the spark of the divine that gives you wisdom inside yourself. And if you go against your gut feeling or your intuition, more often than not, it's the wrong thing to do.
And there is a word that I associate with you, the Heinlein word. Do you know what I'm talking about? You always use it, grokking.
Yeah,
Do you want to give it? Yeah, grokking. Now, is it Heinlein?
yeah, stranger in a strange land.
Stranger in a strange land. There's that, in that book, there's the concept of grokking. And grokking is innerly knowing for certain, And that's interesting, yeah. Good. Yes, over here, thank you. I thought you were going to talk about grokking.
A question
Yes.
about the calling usually, or sometimes it has to do with sacrifice, and sometimes we're afraid to go to the calling because we have to sacrifice something we're not willing or able or saying yes to that call.
I think that is interesting. They always say that one of the reasons that people don't go into the church or become clergy is they're terrified of being sent to Africa or something like that, have to go and live in dreadful conditions or wherever it is to do that. So are you saying, is there fear?
I'm just saying, do you find sometimes that that's a sacrifice having to do with that calling?
Yeah.
There's a sacrifice involved.
Well, I think it's quite interesting. I mean, I used to work in advertising. I was a copywriter at an advertising agency. And, it's quite it took me ages to get this job. I mean, it's one of those jobs that you really have to fight to get. And then very soon after I got the job and was working in a really big advertising agency, I sort of had an epiphany in Nepal. And I thought, no, my life's a spiritual life. This is where I'm going. So I went into the advertising agency and resigned and left. And lots of my friends came and said, it took great courage and sacrifice to do that. But for me, no. Because I think when you follow your calling, when you follow that, there is something that trumps that courage and sacrifice. There's something that's more valuable than having to go through that, because there's a deep sense of contentment and satisfaction that can bear all things and hold all things. In the Bible, it always says that Jesus went to the cross for the joy that was set before him. And I think there is something that enables one to go through that. I think the mind can come in and say, oi, no, I'm in charge here, not the heart. Stay in the job, you'll be much more happy and you'll have more money and those yachts and girls will be there for you. But I do feel, but I think we have to mediate that fear and recognize, that it is there as well, I think. Do you want to say something? Sense?
Well, it makes me think of Mary, you could say that she had a whispering about giving birth to Jesus. Like, how scary was that? It was, what was that going to require from her? Incredible courage and showing upness and willingness to say yes. And so I feel like often the whisperings, they suggest a context of trust. Like, you don't whisper to someone unless you're in a context of trust, do you? And then it requires a consent. And I'm so touched, because I've obviously been thinking about this lately, but of Mary consenting. She consented. So the question is, what are we consenting to? What's being asked of us, and what are we consenting to? And can we find the courage to say yes? And also one more thought, just about the story of Al-Mustafa and Al-Mitra. Isn't it interesting that he was able to come out with all his stuff on love and marriage and children and everything because he was asked, he was invited by someone.
Invited.
And it makes me think, who am I inviting? Like, we need to invite each other and draw out each other's wisdom. Al-Mustafa would never have come out with all that stuff if Al-Mitra hadn't asked him.
I think that's such a good point. Yes, Wendy.
I'm thinking about what you said about giving up, and one of the things that, many things happened for me while I was listening to you today, but one of them was realizing that giving up the sorrow, like the prophet talked about, I could relate to in terms of giving up my own story and the things where I've been wronged or what, I knew I was going to have a hard time putting this into words, sort of my ego and my story. And that in giving that up, there's a sorrow to it because it's been a driving force along with those whispers. And I think about also my vocation, which is counseling others, has been since I was young. But it was much more for a period of time about my own sorrow and my own story and wanting to make things right. And when and better for people, but when I realized it's more about the whispers of the longing for true human connection and love, that's where that's come from, that all that's been given to me has led me in that direction. And if I can give up more of my own sorrow, then I'm going to be able to let go of that stuff and be more in that place.
Yeah, that's lovely, thank you. Yes, Camille.
Thank you. I look at the whispers in the heart as part of your soul contract, that our soul is carried in the heart. I'm a hypnotherapist and a psychic reader and have taken many courage, risk, and daring moments in my life following that intuition.
Yeah, thank you, Camille. Anybody else finding? Well, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. One of the great things about having a conversation like this is for me, it takes us on to the next thing. And when I look at what we're going to talk about tomorrow, it will come out of this conversation. And it's just wonderful. This is one of the ways that we work together like this, is that we talk backwards and forwards, and the conversation continues. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Nicholas just asked me to mention that if you don't know that book he was referring to, it's The Prophet by Kahlil Gibran. It's such an amazing book. So we're just going to spend just a few minutes thinking about people in our hearts, in our lives, and in the world, just to put our attention outside of ourselves for a second. So let's start off by, start close in. Start right close in inside you. Like, who immediately comes to mind that you carry inside you, or that you've heard of, someone you've heard of this week who's struggling in whatever way? Just think of that person. Think of them in all their fullness and everything about them. And how might you pray for this person this morning? And from there, we start off by just thinking of people in our community who've asked for our prayers. We think of all our friends in the Aspen Jewish congregation here and all those affected by what's going on in the Middle East. We pray for all the brothers up at the monastery as they figure out what they're doing next. We pray for the family of Oleg Bodnar in Ukraine, for Christopher Westhoff, for Tammy McKinnelly, for the O'Keefe family, for Kevin Badalian, for John Wampler, for Kristen Valletta, for Kathy Pulowski and Nicholas Bradley and Charla Belinsky and Bob Jenkins and Peggy Burke's sister Carol, and for Pat Freeman, for Rami Shapiro. Anyone else that you might think of in your own heart and mind. And now we just bring our attention out to this town of Aspen, or if you're watching online, wherever you are, your immediate community, your state, this whole country, all the stuff that we see on the news and hear on the news. We think of all those suffering in whatever way, with loneliness, with bereavement, feeling imprisoned in whatever way. For all those in war zones around the world, for all those in unbearable physical pain. We pray for peace in the world. We pray for wisdom in the hearts of all those leading. May we each do our part in our own lives, in our families, in our communities, to bring peace, to realize that which has been given to us to realize and to make real in and through our lives.